Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today, we have Bruce C E Fleming on the show. Bruce is the co-founder of Tru316.com, co-founder of the Tru316 Foundation, and he is author of the Book of Eden and host of the Eden podcast. Bruce helps Christians better understand how mistranslated the Bible verses are about men and women with Tru316.com. If churches were taught correctly, it could decrease domestic violence, verbal abuse, and spiritual abuse. So welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thank you so much. This is really great to be together here. I look forward to this time.
Yeah, and I did leave out all the parts of everything that your wife, Joy, has done. So did you want to let us know how she's involved in this?
We were called as missionary professors in French-speaking Africa. And on our way, we realized we better speak better French than we did. So the mission organization said, go to France for a year. And that turned into 2 years to work it up to good enough French. And as we were there, we were recommended to go do our PhDs so we would be able to help accredit the seminary where we were going to go in the Central African Republic. And one of the African leaders said to Joy, if you're going to be an Old Testament professor, we love the whole Old Testament, but we'd rather you didn't write a dissertation on Habakkuk 17 or something. Could you really give us a real good passage and do your dissertation on that? And as she prayed about it in the first months of her doctorate program, the Lord led her to do the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2 and 3. And so that's where she did her 407-page doctoral dissertation on the Hebrew words of Genesis 2 and 3. And that's what we're using as our basis for the Eden podcast and our books and courses that have spun off of that.
Wow, that's great. I mean, I know I listened to a little bit of season 1 and you heard that, and that's great, I think, that she studied those 2 books of the Bible. I mean, finding all this information, I mean, that's so critical to get it right from the beginning.
And in Africa, they said, each one of our tribes has their own creation account and their own origin story, and they're all kind of different. And we just need to focus on, what the Bible really says. So if you can make it clear, that'll help. And so that's what she did. She just kept her finger on the text and said, now this is what it says, and here's how we can apply it.
Yeah, this is great.
I'm definitely excited for this because this is truth.
It is. It's so needed. So this is Karen. I know we talked a little bit before, but nice to officially meet you.
Thank you, Karen.
So this is such an important topic, like we were saying, and it's very important to me personally because I was spiritually abused and scripture was taken out of context and used to manipulate me. And Brenda had the same experience. And I know a lot of our listeners have too. We've gotten a lot of feedback on it. So if you don't mind, it'd be great if you just go over the Eden Bible study, just kind of explain how it all got started.
So I actually put together the Eden Bible study as just a 2 or 3 page handout for people. And as I had it, I was coming up on interviewing Natalie Hoffman on the Eden podcast. And so I said, hey, Natalie, can I just take you through the Eden Bible study? And she was up for it. And we went through that. So basically what that does is it talks about what happened in Genesis 3, starting with verse 1, and works its way all the way through the rest of the chapter. I don't know if you want me to go through chapter 3 or even talk a little bit about chapter 2. How would you like me to do this?
Whatever you did with Natalie.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is take you through the Eden Bible study pretty much word for word. I tried really hard to summarize things well. So let's start with it.
Sure.
Back in the beginning, Satan attacked the woman and the man. He succeeded in getting them both to eat the forbidden fruit. That comes from Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. Now, the reason we talk about that is because a lot of people, and we have some young grand twins, and when you look in their children's Bible and the pictures of what happened in the Garden of Eden, you'll see an apple tree, and you'll see a serpent hanging down from the tree, and you'll see one person being talked to, the woman, right? Have you seen those pictures?
Yeah.
And what Joy said in that dissertation, she said, take a look at the pronouns in the Hebrew. It's in French, it's clear. You can have a you singular and you plural, but I just use the word you twice in English because we don't have a singular and plural. Well, if you're down south, you can say y'all, right? So she said, look, the pronouns here. Every time the serpent said you, he said y'all. And so what he's doing is he's talking to both of them at the tree. And we want to make that point. Satan attacked both the woman and the man, and he succeeded in getting them both to eat the forbidden fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, afterwards, when God asked and said, hey, tell me what happened, the man volunteered. And he said, I, kind of like the old sailor, I, sir. And yet it had been we, all of us, both of us. And yet he's just talking about himself. That's a little interesting indication of what's going on in his heart. And so when God said, okay, if you want to speak up, let's talk. And he asked the man, what have you done? And who told you you were naked? Well, told brings to mind the idea of hearing somebody's voice. Okay. Whose voice had he been hearing when he was at the foot of the tree? He'd been hearing the voice of the serpent tempter. But the man failed to point out the role of the serpent tempter who had lied to them and twisted God's word. Instead, the man turned on God and on the woman and blamed them for his rebellion. Take a look at chapter 3, verse 12. Then God asked the woman what she had done, and the woman didn't blame anybody. Instead, she confessed her disobedience and unmasked the serpent tempter. She correctly told God that the serpent tempter had deceived her. Chapter 3, verse 13. Immediately, God acted on the woman's words and cursed the serpent. 3:14. Next, God confirmed that the woman would be Satan's combatant. He said, I will put enmity between you and the woman. And he announced to Satan that the woman's offspring would crush his head. 3:15. And when I first went to seminary, I heard one of my first Latin words. I didn't know any Latin, but theologians like to use Latin words, and they had this one, proto-evangelium. And they said, this is the proto-evangelium. Isn't this wonderful? This is the first announcement of God's good news in Genesis 3:15. And when I first heard that, I thought, that's a bit strange. Why would he announce the gospel to the serpent tempter? So I kind of put a check in the back of my spirit. I thought, okay, I heard that, but I don't quite feel comfortable believing that. At least I kind of do, but I kind of don't. Anyhow, back in 3:16, God turned back to the woman. And in the first line, he says, I'm going to do something. God says, I'm going to act. He says, multiplying, I will multiply. That's the first two Hebrew words. And then he says, I'm going to multiply two things. I'm going to bring two things to pass, one thing and another thing. And that second thing was conception. The Hebrew word for that is heron. That's in line 1 of Genesis 3:16. So what God was saying is, I'm going to multiply your conception. I'm going to bring your conception to pass, or I'm going to multiply your pregnancy. So God told her she would still fulfill the blessing God gave to the humans on day 6 of creation. The humans would be fruitful and multiply. And most specifically, the woman would bear the seed or the offspring who would defeat Satan. That's the proto-evangelium part 2. God gave to her the good news of the promised champion. She heard the first part when God was talking to the serpent, got thinking about that, and then God confirmed it to her in line 1 of Genesis 3:16. Now, in line 1 of 3:16, God also told her that she would experience difficulty, not just her difficulty. It was difficulty along with the man when they both did field work. That would be because God would curse the ground because of the man. And as a result, both would experience sorrowful toil. Itzabon is the Hebrew word in line 3:16, line 1. So God's words to the woman in line 1 of 3:16, the best way I think I could help you is to go take a look at the King James Version. There's the old King James Version in 1611. There's the new King James Version, more modern. And you can see the two things that God says, I'm going to multiply. He says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. See that? There's two things, your sorrow and your conception. I want to pay close attention because sorrow or sorrowful toil is what both the man and the woman will experience doing field work of the cursed ground with their hands. This is not childbirth. This is not the act of giving birth. This is sorrowful toil with dirt under your fingernails and thorns in your palms when you're sweating. And in the fields in Africa, what did we see in the gardens out there? It was the women with sticks digging in the ground and experiencing this sorrowful toil. And the men participated some out there. Then the other word is, I will multiply your conception or your pregnancy. Well, conception happens 9 months before the act of childbirth. So if you look at the King James, the Hebrew sense comes through clearly. God's going to act in two ways. One is bad news. The other is good news. I'm going to multiply your sorrowful toil, and I'm going to multiply or bring to pass your conception. Now we got to turn to our modern language Bibles, starting in 1952 with the Revised Standard Version. And then after that, with the New International Version, the New American Standard Version, with the Living Bible, later on the ESV, they took words 3 and 4, those two different words. God says, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And they introduced an incorrect, unjustified, and very misleading single new idea. They put those two words together as if they were just one. And so when they did that, they erased the obvious connection of Hebrew word number 3, sorrowful toil, down to God's words to the man in 3:17. And they also erased the obvious connection of Hebrew word number 4, conception, with God's promise to the woman's offspring who would crush Satan's head in 3:15. And they replaced the two Hebrew words with a new single idea that's not part of the original text. What happens when we put something into a Bible translation that's not part of the original text? How good an idea is that? Well, here's what they said. That God will multiply your pain in childbirth. Now, this is a widespread and familiar idea because all these translations say it, but it's not a correct translation of the Hebrew words, and it leads us astray and introduces all kinds of problems. This single and different action is supposedly taken by God at the end of her pregnancy, leads people to think, well, that's like a curse on the woman. But when we true the verse, we discover that God didn't curse Eve, God didn't curse Adam, and he didn't limit woman in any way. So let's think about it. When we were in Africa and elsewhere, and Joy said, the verb to curse, a rur or a rar, is only found twice in this part of Genesis 3. And she said, God cursed the serpent tempter, and God cursed the ground 2 times. He didn't curse either human being. Now think about that for a second. They thought he did. They said, he cursed 3 times. Well, no, 4 times. Some people even think he cursed more than that. And so what they were telling us was, in Genesis chapter 2, we have a sweet, loving God who's fantastic, and he creates the Garden of Eden, puts man and woman in there, and they go on their honeymoon in the Garden of Eden, bed and breakfast. But in chapter 3, we have the mean, nasty, unfair God that we have to fear. And he went around and he said, I take it all back, and I'm going to curse these 2 people that I was supposed to be loving. And when Joy said, well, no, wait a minute, he didn't curse the man. He cursed the ground. Look at that. He was going to curse. It looked like he was going to curse the man. And he said, cursed is the ground. And he diverts the curse to hit the ground. And the guy goes, whew, that was close. There's the grace of God. He did not curse the man. And yet they said, well, yeah, but he cursed the woman because she got pain in childbirth. So they said, Joy said, there's no curse there. And they said, well, it looks like it. And she said, it means sorrowful toil and conception. It doesn't mean pain in childbirth. And they said, well, we're looking at our Bibles. We're looking at our French translation, or we're looking at our Lingala translation, or our Mbaka translation, or our Mono translation, or our Apakabeti translation, all their African languages that were right around there where we were. And they said, it looks like he cursed her. So if he did that, and since God is just, she must have deserved it. And based on that, they said, well, she must have been flawed from the start. And so they said, we got to bring the hammer down on women just like God did. And they said, we're going to limit a woman's destructive nature. They thought she had destructive nature in the home. She has to be limited. And we're going to restrict a woman's destructive nature in the church. And so they restricted women in the church. And they looked for Bible passages elsewhere, and they interpreted them in the light of this mistranslation. And that led to their misinterpretation. And that led to a bad practice. And none of this is biblical.
Wow.
So after getting Genesis 3:16 wrong, modern translators and commentators have gone on to misread other passages on women and men in the Bible, as I was starting to say. They act as if Eve was the temptress and as if Adam was the combatant against Satan. This is a twisting of the truth and a reversal of the facts that's really more in line with Satan's aims as he continues to work against us all, but especially as he combats women. So that's what Natalie and I did. We went through these couple of pages, and if you'd like a copy of it, you can email me, just Bruce at Tru316.com, Tru316.com. And I'll send you a copy of what I call the Eden Bible study. But we've gone on and we've done a lot more than that. There's a lot more I'd like to talk about with you.
I've got to say that was an excellent podcast with Natalie. Everything,
Yeah.
but you're saying a lot of the same things, but it's great. So this is so important.
Yeah. I mean, I think I grew up from a kid hearing that verse that we were cursed in childbirth.
Yeah.
And also the other one of, oh, well, you're just a woman because you were taken out of a rib. God took the rib of a man. And so you're just a woman. Like
Yeah.
you're
And
nothing.
Genesis 2, order of creation, so-called. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I get those two. I grew up just believing those things.
Yeah.
And to hear that they're not true is so freeing right now.
Yeah.
And to know that they're not true because of the words that it actually says.
Yeah.
Never even thought of those small words like when Adam said I and blamed it, on everyone else, but the woman took accountability. That speaks volumes.
Yeah.
So,
Right. There's an interesting story when the people of Israel are coming into the promised land. God says, all right, some of you want to be on this side of the Jordan River, and some of the others are going to be on the other side of the Jordan River. And I want you to set aside 3 cities on each side of the Jordan River, and they're going to be called the 6 cities of refuge. Do you remember what that was about? Why he did that?
I don't.
no.
Okay, so that's a pop quiz, and it's not fair on my part.
I think I should have studied that before.
I'm a seminary professor. I'm a hard teacher. So here's what it was for. He said, look, this was the deal. If somebody committed murder on purpose, first-degree murder, then there were not courts and there was not a whole legal system, but the deal was that there was going to be a person who avenged the murder. It would be a relative, a close neighbor, a person like that. And so they would find out who committed the murder, and then the avenger would go find that person and put him to death. Okay. That's what you did with first-degree murderers. But God said, some people kill other people and they didn't do it on purpose. They weren't what we call first-degree murderers. They were second-degree murderers. And in America, we call that you're guilty of manslaughter. You didn't do it on purpose. In England, they say malice aforethought or something like that. So there's a difference between, in both cases, you're killing somebody. That's terrible. But first-degree murder is done on purpose, and second-degree murder is not done on purpose. Maybe it was an accident. And so God said that the people who were second-degree murderers should have a place to go where they can run and they can hide in these cities. They will take them in as cities of refuge, and that the avenger is not allowed to go in there and put them to death. The people of those cities know it's their job to take care of those people and to they're exiled to those cities, those 6 cities. And then eventually with the 50th year of Jubilee, they're actually allowed to go back out and resume their life in society. So there's a difference between first-degree sinners, murderers, and second-degree sinners, manslaughter people. Well, let's think about what happened at the tree, at the Garden of Eden. The woman says to God, I was deceived by the serpent tempter. And God doesn't say, well, no, that's not really true. Instead, God acts on her words, and he says to the serpent, because you did this. Well, because you did what? You did what she just said. I'm taking her testimony as true, and I'm acting on that, and I'm judging you and condemning you based on her insightful, faithful, true testimony. He's not treating her like a temptress or like a second-rate person. He is validating that and curses the serpent. And twice in the New Testament, it says that the woman was deceived. Okay. So that means, if we think about it, in 1 Timothy, it says the man was not deceived. So was she a first-degree eater or a second-degree eater? Did she eat rebelliously on purpose, or was she deceived and tricked? She thought, and she lists 3 good things, 3 reasons why she thought it was good to eat the fruit. So then she ate the fruit. She disobeyed. She died, right? She's not here anymore. She died. So was she a first-degree eater or a second-degree eater?
You're asking us? Second?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Second. She was a second-degree eater. Now, the man, he wasn't deceived. So the angel, rebel angel, we know who that was, the serpent, the dragon, Satan. He did not follow God's word. He rejected God's authority over him. He rebelled against God's rule, said, I'm going to rule in God's place. He comes, and Jesus called him a liar the father of lies and a murderer from the beginning. The beginning, that's in the Garden of Eden. So he called him a murderer from the beginning and the father of lies. So he comes, and his first lie is he didn't come dancing into the middle of the Garden of Eden all in his full glory as this wonderful angel. Instead, he lied by taking the shape of an animal. That's his first lie.
Mm.
And then he begins to lie with the words that he does. And guess what the woman does? Remember what God said in Genesis chapter 1? I want you, you're going to rule over all creation. And so the woman hears this snake say the wrong things, and she corrects him. She's ruling over him properly. He says, well, this and that. And she goes, well, no, that's not right. That's not what's going on. Now, he didn't accept that correction. He persisted, and he lied some more till finally he tricked her. And look, how many of you want to go up against Satan? How many do I want to go up against Satan? He's the father of lies. So he tricked her. And what, had she ever heard even a lie before? I don't think so. And so God was there, and God was watching from a distance too. So the man now sees how the serpent rebel is saying, you should rule over yourself and you should disobey God. And so the man rejects God's rule over him, and the man decides to rule over himself and do what he wants to do. And he goes ahead and he eats the fruit. So he is a first degree eater. And he deserves a more severe punishment than the second degree eater. So Joyce says, all right, now let's take a look farther down. Let's look in the passage. Do we see a distinction? Because right here, the way they eat should be clearly distinguished. There's a difference. First degree, second degree eater. And a lot of people haven't seen that. So then when God speaks to the serpent tempter, he says, because he talks to him in 6 points. He says, because you have done this, cursed is all the days of your life. And then there's 3 more things. He has a 6-point pattern that's very clear in the Hebrew in Genesis 3:14 and 15. And then when God speaks to the man, the same 6 points are used. Because you've done this, cursed is all the days of your life, and the other 3 points. 6 points. When he talks to the woman in the middle, none of those 6 points are used. So what you're hearing now is God talks the same way to on-purpose rebels, to the serpent tempter and to the man. And they each get a curse and more. And when God talks to the woman, the second degree eater, there is no curse. There is no all the days of your life. There is none of that. See the distinction there?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Wow.
I know.
I'm like just blown away.
I know. I'm just picturing those. I have so many questions though, even about like Satan and why did God curse the form that he took when things like that. Did you ever study anything like that? Or I've always been fascinated with that whole, those scriptures because they are so fascinating.
Yeah, it's a good point that when we went to Africa, before we went, we were told, look, in the West, people are philosophical. We use concepts like, have you ever heard of the 4 spiritual laws?
Yeah.
We talk about principles. Everything ends with ION, all these ION words, things. We went to France and we found out that an ION word is a feminine word for concepts. And then there's masculine words, et cetera. Just a distinction. We just think in concepts. But look out. Most of the world doesn't think that way. They think in what's called concrete relational thinking. So, for example, I came across when I was involved in Youth for Christ in a high school ministry in Ohio, when I was just starting out, we used a nice little yellow booklet called, have you ever heard of the 4 spiritual laws? God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life and the rest of that.
Mm-hmm.
And to our seminary one day came a wonderful man from Korea, and he brought a tract that none of us understood at all. And it was very popular and very useful in South Korea. And we just kind of scratched our heads, and probably it ended up in the trash. And then when I was studying to go to Africa, I heard about a similar presentation. It was called the 9 Bible Trees. I don't know, 9 Bible trees. And what it was they said, take a look at this tree. It's a dead white tree, no leaves, no bark. It's standing there. It's, stark against the sky. It's obviously dead. And that is a good symbol of people who are spiritually dead. And all of us we're spiritually dead. Next to it is a great big mango tree, and it's got leaves and it's got bark and it looks strong, but if you look closely, it's riddled with a huge termite colony. And the next wind that comes along, poof, it's going to fall over. It's basically dead. And they went through the 9 different kind of trees to teach you some spiritual concepts, but they didn't use abstract words. They used real things, see?
Mm-hmm.
And so when God curses the serpent's body, that taught the Hebrews very clearly, this is serious. You'll see a lot of that going on in Genesis 2 and 3. You actually eat the fruit of the tree. You don't just mouth off to God. You have to eat, that's how you disobey.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that concrete relational information going on in Genesis 2 and 3. Another good one is, Joy said, take a look at this. Genesis 2 and 3 is written as a unit. It's written as a chiasm. Chi is the letter, like the letter X in Greek. And a chiasm basically means you've got a bell curve. It starts low, builds up to a top, and then comes down low on the other side, kind of like a rainbow. And she said, look at this. Genesis 2 and 3 is written like a chiasm. She says, at the bottom, you come into the Garden of Eden. And then at the top, you're together with God in the Garden of Eden. And then at the other side, as you exit Genesis chapter 3, there they are at the bottom, and they're leaving the Garden of Eden. And another thing about a chiasm, the section on the lower left is pretty much parallel to the section on the lower right. And then the middle section on the one side has similar elements as the thing on the right. And then as you get closer to the top, they're pretty much alike. So she said, this is an A, B, C, D, C prime, B prime, A prime pattern. And I said, well, that's okay. That's nice. and she said, but look at this. The center of a chiasm is usually the main point. So what is the main point of all of Genesis 2 and 3? What's the most important verse of Genesis 2 and 3? And I get to ask you that question. What's the most important verse of Genesis 2 and 3? Based on the chiasm insight, what's the center of this rainbow pattern?
What do you think, Brenda?
I don't know. You got to tell us.
All right. So it's
To be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.